The maid's daughter slapped the 70-year-old Mafia king for forcing her to marry him. Then, he did the unexpected. Everyone who worked inside those tall iron gates knew one rule. You keep your head down, you do your work, and you go home. That was the only way to survive working for Don Emeka Danjuma. Don Emeka was 70 years old, a big man in every sense of the word. He had money that most people in Lagos couldn't even imagine. He had connections that went all the way up. Politicians, judges, businessmen. Everyone owed him something, or feared him, or both. He had been married 3 times. His first wife passed when he was in his 40s. His second left quietly and was never spoken of again. His third stayed until she couldn't anymore, and when she died, the household staff said she died of a kind of sadness that has no name. He had 2 grown sons who barely called. He had a house full of staff and a heart full of nothing much, really. Adaeze was 24. She had just finished her nursing degree, the first in her family to ever hold a certificate from a proper university. She was not rich. She had never been rich. But she carried herself like someone who had decided a long time ago that poverty was not going to become her personality. She was bright, she was sharp, and she had her mother's warm eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Her mother, Mama Ngozi, had worked in the Danjuma compound for 18 years. 18 years of washing, ironing, cooking, and keeping her thoughts to herself. She had raised Adaeze mostly on the money she brought home from that compound, and Adaeze had grown up knowing that her school fees, her books, her meals, all of it came from those tall iron gates she had never stepped inside herself. That changed on a Tuesday. Mama Ngozi had a stroke. A small one, the doctors said. Not fatal, but she couldn't work. She couldn't stand for long hours. She needed rest and medication, and someone to take care of her. The hospital bills were already beginning to pile up, and Adaeze had only just graduated. She hadn't even started working yet. Then the call came, not from the hospital, from Don Emeka Danjuma himself. His voice on the phone was calm and flat, like a man reading from a list. He told Adaeze that her mother had served him faithfully, and that he respected that. He told her that during her mother's recovery, he expected her to come and fill in, not as a request. As a statement of fact, he had already told the head of staff to expect her the following morning. Adaeze stood in that small rented room with the phone pressed to her ear, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She wanted to say no, but then she thought about the hospital bill sitting on the table. She thought about her mother lying in that bed. She thought about how long 18 years was, and how little her mother had to show for it in terms of savings. She packed a bag and went. The compound was exactly what she had imagined, and nothing like she had imagined at the same time. It was large and quiet, in a way that felt heavy. The staff moved around each other with practiced silence. Nobody laughed loudly. Nobody gossiped near the main house. They showed Adaeze where to sleep, what to do, when to do it, and then left her to figure out the rest. She cooked. She cleaned. She answered when she was spoken to, and didn't speak when she wasn't. She was not the kind of person who needed to fill silence with noise, but she also didn't shrink. When one of the guards looked at her a second too long in a way she didn't like, she looked right back until he turned away. When the head of staff spoke to her in a tone that assumed too much, she answered with a politeness that was somehow also a warning. Don Emeka noticed. He was used to people in his house behaving like furniture, present, but not really there. Adaeze was different. She moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going, and had decided to be there fully. He found himself watching her from the upstairs window, then from across the dining room, then from his study doorway. By the end of the second week, he called her in. His study was large and dark, and smelled of old wood and expensive cologne. He sat behind a desk that was bigger than some bedrooms Adaeze had lived in. He was dressed in a white agbada, and he looked old, not weak, but old, like a man who had been somewhere very far away for a very long time, and wasn't quite sure what to do with himself now that he was back. He didn't offer her a seat. He slid a folder across the desk. She opened it. Inside was a document, a marriage certificate, already filled out. Her full name, Adaeze Chisom Nwosu, printed in neat black ink beside his. There was a date at the bottom, 3 weeks away. She read it twice. Then she looked up at him. "Your mother's hospital bills are cleared," he said. His voice was the same calm, flat tone as always. Her pension will be structured and paid monthly for the rest of her life. You will want for nothing. All you need to do is sign. He said it the way someone might offer to pay for lunch. Like it was a small, easy, obvious thing. Something moved through Adaeze in that moment. She couldn't name exactly what it was. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was something older and deeper. The feeling of being looked at and not seen. The feeling of being counted as a thing that could be bought, like a piece of furniture for his already furnished life. Her mother had given 18 years to this man's household, and now he was sitting here, looking at her daughter like she was the next transaction. She closed the folder, then she slapped him. Not hard enough to hurt him badly, but hard enough to mean it. Her palm against his cheek, one clean, deliberate sound in that silent room. The two bodyguards at the door moved immediately, hands going to their sides. Don Emeka raised one finger. They stopped. The room was absolutely still. The old man sat with his cheek slightly red, looking at her. Not with rage, not with the cold threat she had been bracing for. He looked startled, like a man who had just heard a language he had forgotten existed. "Get out," he said quietly. "You are not dismissed from this house. You are dismissed from this room." Adaeze walked out with her hands steady and her heart slamming against her chest. She went back to the kitchen, finished what she had been doing before she was called, and then sat very still on the back steps and waited for whatever was coming next. Nothing came. No guards, no threats, no summons. The night passed. The morning came. She made breakfast. She cleaned. She waited again. On the third morning after the study, she found an envelope outside her room door. Inside were two things. The first was a receipt, her mother's entire hospital bill, marked paid in full with the Danjuma family seal. The second was a handwritten note on plain white paper, in shaky but careful handwriting. "I handled that poorly. I am not accustomed to apology, but I owe you one. E.D." She read it 4 times. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket and went to make tea. After that, things were different. Not entirely. It was still his house and she was still working in it. But Don Emeka stopped calling her to his study. Instead, he started appearing in the kitchen, quietly, without announcement. He would sit at the small wooden table where the staff ate, and he would ask her things, not orders, questions. He asked what her nursing degree had been like. She told him. The late nights, the difficult professors, the practical exams that made her hands shake even now when she thought about them. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his phone. For a man who was used to controlling every conversation he entered, he was surprisingly good at listening when he chose to be. She started asking her own questions back, carefully, at first, then less carefully. She asked him why his sons never visited. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Because I spent so many years teaching them that feelings were weakness, that they eventually had no feelings left to feel for me." He said it without self-pity, just as a fact. Like reading from an old report he had already accepted the findings of. She asked him why he had chosen her. He was quiet again, longer this time. "Because you were the first person in this house in many years who spoke to me like I was capable of being wrong," he said. "I did not handle that well either. But it was the first honest thing I had felt in a long time." Adaeze looked at this old man sitting at a kitchen table that was worth less than his wristwatch, and she understood, for the first time, that power and loneliness are not opposites. Sometimes they grow together, one feeding the other, until a man ends up with everything and nothing at the same time. She didn't pity him, but she stopped being afraid of him. 3 weeks later, Adaeze went home to take care of her mother. She didn't sign anything. She didn't agree to anything. She left the way she came, with a small bag and her nursing certificate. But 2 months after she left, a lawyer came to her mother's door. He carried documents for the establishment of a new charitable trust, the Ngozi Nwosu Medical Trust, named after her mother. The trust was funded entirely by Don Emeka Danjuma. Its stated purpose was to train and sponsor 50 young nurses from low-income families every year across Nigeria. And in the founding documents, Adaeze Chisom Nwosu was named the first director. His lawyers reportedly told him this was reckless. His sons called it madness, and immediately consulted their own lawyers. Don Emeka said nothing to either of them. When journalists found out about the trust and traced it back to him, he gave a single short statement. "I spent 50 years learning how to take. I would like to spend whatever time I have left learning how to give. That is all." Adaeze took the role. She threw herself into it the same way she threw herself into everything, completely. Within 3 years, the trust had placed over 120 nurses into clinics across 4 states, many in rural areas that had never had a qualified nurse before. She hired carefully, trained rigorously, and ran the organization the way her mother had taught her to do any job worth doing, with full presence and no shortcuts. Don Emeka Danjuma died at 76. He had spent his last years largely out of the public eye. Staff at the trust said he visited a few of the clinics in the final year of his life, quietly, without telling anyone in advance. He would sit and watch the work being done. He rarely spoke. He just watched, the way a man watches something he built, but doesn't need to take credit for anymore. In his will, the majority of his estate, the compound, several investment accounts, 2 properties, went to the trust. His sons contested it immediately. They hired a team of lawyers and filed every motion available to them. They lost. Every single one. Adaeze was not at the funeral. She had a clinic visit scheduled in Kogi State, and she kept it. But she sent flowers, white ones, and a small card that the staff said, Don Emeka's eldest son read, and then folded and put in his pocket without saying a word. The card said, "You had enough time to choose differently. You used it. That is not nothing. A.N." Mama Ngozi, for her part, recovered well. She never went back to working in anyone's house. She spent her days in the small garden behind the home Adaeze eventually bought for her, growing tomatoes and peppers, and telling the neighborhood children stories about her daughter, the one who went into the big man's house and came out having changed it entirely. She never told them about the slap. Some things, she said, you carry quietly. But she smiled every time she thought of it.